Undoubtedly, the most famous document associated with Luther and the Reformation is the 95 Theses. Interestingly, it could easily be argued that many of Luther's later writings were much more radical theologically. So, why is it that the 95 Theses are seen as having primary importance? In all likelihood, it's due to the fact that Luther's document not only reverberated in theological circles, but his opinions and insights had immense social, political, and economic ramifications as well.
Wait a minute. Is that supposed to be me? Turn it up.
That brings us to a very interesting question scholars and historians have debated for over 500 years.
Did I, Luther, know what I was doing when I wrote the 95 Theses?
Looks like it's supposed to be you. Yeah, sorry.
As we've mentioned in previous episodes, the task of history is to let the sources speak for themselves. So, in an attempt to answer the question, we'll turn to his autobiographical fragment in his preface to the Latin works written in 1545. In it, Luther explained some of what he was thinking some nearly 30 years earlier. This is how he put it in 1545.
I certainly thought that in this case I should have a protector in the Pope, on whose trustworthiness I then leaned strongly. For in his decrees he most clearly damned the immoderation of the quaestors, as he called the indulgence preachers. Soon afterward I wrote 2 letters, one to Albrecht, the Archbishop of Mainz, who got half of the money from the indulgences, the Pope the other half, something I did not know at the time.
Could they not afford a better puppet?
What are you talking about? I think it makes you look very handsome.
Here, from Luther's own recollection, we can see a claim that he wasn't calculating the impact his 95 Theses would have on a general society, politically or economically. This point seems to be furthered when we look at his letter he wrote to Albrecht, dated on the same day he is said to have posted the 95 Theses. In that letter, he wrote,
I bewail the gross misunderstanding among the people which comes from these preachers, and which they spread everywhere among common men. Evidently the poor souls believe that when they have bought indulgence letters, they are then assured of their salvation.
Luther continued,
They are likewise convinced that souls escape from purgatory as soon as they have placed the contribution into the chest. Further, they assume that the grace obtained through these indulgences is so completely effective that there is no sin of such magnitude that it cannot be forgiven. Finally, they also believe that man is freed from every penalty and guilt by these indulgences. O great God, the souls committed to your care, excellent Father, are thus directed to death. For all these souls have the heaviest and a constantly increasing responsibility. Therefore, I can no longer be silent on this subject. No man can be assured of his salvation by any episcopal function.
Clearly, in this letter to Albrecht, Luther's pastoral heart is on full display. This was not simply an academic exercise or dispute for Luther. It was a matter of the salvation of souls. Interestingly, though, at this point in 1517, Luther had not yet had his breakthrough regarding justification by faith and not by works. To this point, he wrote in that letter to Albrecht that works of piety and love are infinitely better than indulgences. And yet, the indulgence preachers do not preach them with an equally big display and effort. For on no occasion has Christ ordered that indulgences should be preached, but he forcefully commanded that the gospel to be preached. What a horror, what a danger for a bishop to permit the loud noise of indulgences among his people, while the gospel is silenced, and to be more concerned with the sale of indulgence than with the gospel. Will not Christ say to such bishops, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel? Luther also noted that in addition to sending a letter to Albrecht, he also sent one to Jerome, the Bishop of Brandenburg, appealing to him to stop the sale of indulgences. Now, there's an interesting wrinkle in the story of the 95 Theses. While today we recognize the Theses as making a huge impact, The initial reaction to them was muted.
In fact, in the first months after writing the 95 Theses, everything appeared to be quiet.
I don't sound like that, do I?
The only direct testimony I gave about the distribution of the theses may be my letter to Johann Lang on November 11th. In that letter, I addressed concerns that would likely be raised by theologians at the University of Erfurt.
Luther does not suppose they will be pleased. Why? Because of his critique of Aristotle. Subsequent letters until January 1518 are completely silent about indulgences.
I wish he'd be silent. Stupid puppet.
The initial public reception of these theses is actually unclear. There appears to have been silence about them, even in Wittenberg, among his colleagues. Luther certainly circulated the theses within a small circle, but it was small.
Nevertheless, the 95 Theses provoked an echo. This was due mostly to the fact that they were printed in several places outside Wittenberg. We know they were printed in Nuremberg, Leipzig, and Basel, probably still in December of 1517. The question is, who sent them off to be printed?
Luther later said that within 2 weeks, the theses spread throughout almost all Germany.
As though the angels themselves were the messengers carrying news to all peoples.
And while we don't know who had the theses printed, we do know that it was principally the new medium of the printing press which made this swift distribution possible. Luther was obviously surprised by the widespread distribution and the rapid publicity. It appeared a miracle to him, but he was not completely happy about it.
I'm not happy about this either. I'm not sure I'll ever recover from seeing this.
Now, certainly, I didn't regret writing these theses. I wanted the truth to be known, but it seemed to me that the theses appeared unsuitable for that purpose. If I would have anticipated the public distribution and reaction, I would have composed my statements in a clearer and more understandable fashion.
But how did the Episcopal party, to which Luther had sent his letters on October 31st, react? Bishop Jerome Schultz of Brandenburg apparently replied, advising him against beginning the matter, warning him that he would encounter difficulties since he was attacking the power of the Church. Luther's initial reaction to this is unknown. His later comment, however, was that through the bishop, the devil was speaking.
Frederick the Wise, the Prince Elector of Saxony, had the indulgence theses read to him by Spalatin while on a journey at an unknown date. His terse comment was this: "You will see the Pope will not like this." And we know the Bishop of Meersburg was aware of these theses on November 27th, 1517, perhaps because I had sent them to him.
At that time, the Bishop of Meersburg, and obviously he was not alone in this, and would have happily gotten rid of indulgences, but that could have taken place only with the agreement of his superior, the Archbishop of Magdeburg. He would have preferred a warning about Tetzel's deception, and he desired that the theses, which the Augustinian monk in Wittenberg has made, should be posted in many places. That could do great damage to the grace of indulgences.
I can't stand listening to that puppet. I can't do it anymore. Read the closed captions if you must.
Of most interest, naturally, is the reaction of Archbishop Albrecht, who must have received the letter sent by Luther relatively late, about the end of November, in Aschaffenburg. He did not reply to Luther. Instead, he asked the University of Mainz for an opinion about the theses on December 1st. Only 10 days later, he had a reminder sent to them. So apparently, he regarded the matter as urgent.
On December 13th, Albrecht informed his Magdeburg counselors that the defiant action of the monk, in other words, Luther, troubled him little as far as his own person was concerned. However, in order that the people would not be scandalized and led into error, he had requested an opinion from the theologians and jurists in Mainz. The advice of the Aschaffenburg counselors was to initiate the processus inhibitoris against Luther, i.e., to prohibit him from impeding indulgences.
The very brief opinion from Mainz did not appear until December 17, 1517, and thus it played no role in Albrecht's communication to Rome. It singled out only one aspect of the theses, namely, that in them the Pope's power concerning the distribution of indulgences was not only limited and restricted, Luther was also diverging from the teaching of the Church.
However, since there was a prohibition against disputing this subject, the opinion from Mainz also recommended that the theses be sent to the Curia, church authorities, for examination. The Mainzers believed it is not their place to condemn these theses, although they hinted they did not agree with them. Confronted with a considerable problem, the University of Mainz was thus apparently skillfully withdrawing from the affair.
On the basis of Albrecht's information, Rome also did not initially bring out any heavy artillery, but instead attempted to influence Luther through his superiors. So, on February 3, 1518, Pope Leo X asked Gabriel Venetus, the protomagister, and, at that time, the head of the Augustinian hermits, to dissuade that priest of his order, who was spreading new things in Germany and informing the people of a new doctrine. This was to be done in writing or by learned and dependable intermediaries who should attempt to appease the man, Luther.
With this, we can get at least a little insight into the earliest responses to the 95 Theses. Interestingly, Luther's opponents also conceded that giving alms and loving one's neighbors are incomparably better than indulgences. The individuals who were upset as much as anyone were the preachers who were promoting indulgences.
Thus began a campaign to malign Luther as a heretic. This infuriated Luther, especially since because of him, they also attempted to bring the University of Wittenberg into disrepute and under suspicion of heresy. To Luther's regret, wagging tongues spread the rumor that the entire criticism of indulgences was instigated by the elector because he envied Albrecht of Brandenburg.
By February of 1518, so about 3 months after posting the 95 Theses, Luther recognized that he was involved in great political matters against his will. Even so, Luther wasn't necessarily avoiding a discussion about indulgences, as he did discuss them in a sermon on February 2nd, 1518.
Going back to Luther's own recollection, he wrote about this time period in the preface to the Latin works. This is how he put it.
But the poor little brother was despised. Despised, I published the theses and at the same time a German sermon on indulgences. Shortly thereafter, also the explanations in which, to the Pope's honor, I developed the idea that indulgences should indeed not be condemned, but that good works of love should be preferred to them. This was demolishing heaven and consuming the earth with fire. I am accused by the Pope, am cited to Rome, and the whole papacy rises up against me alone. All this happening in the year 1518, when Maximilian held the Diet at Augsburg.
And with that, we'll leave it to you to decide whether or not Luther really knew what he was starting to attack in the 95 Theses.
Well, no, that's not supposed to be me, is it? Is that what people think I look like?